all the colostrum milk is they will extract that and then they will freeze it in big freezers as big as like a gymnasium, because they will hold this colostrum milk for later production. Because after 1 week, the milk now becomes just ordinary milk. So it has lower bioactives present already. Next. So the bioactives from milk, as I mentioned earlier, comes from the proteins. Not all proteins are bioactives. For example, casein, alpha-lactalbumin, beta-lactoglobulin, bovine serum albumin are just proteins. So these proteins still need to be broken down into peptides so that it will yield a bioactive. However, lactoferrin and immunoglobulins are already bioactives in protein form. So the other bioactives from milk comes from its fat. Remember, when we first start with the whole milk, we pass it through a centrifuge and we produce cream. So cream is where the milk fat goes. And skim milk is where the proteins go. So milk fat is where bioactives also resides. That's why long time ago, this is already the new trend even here in New Zealand. Before, we are looking at milk fat as a culprit because it causes you will gain weight if you keep on consuming whole milk because of the milk fat. But it turns out that the milk fat has lots of bioactives. That's why here in New Zealand, the trend now is to consume more of the whole milk rather than the skim milk, because you get bioactives both from the protein portion as well as the milk fat portion. And among the bioactives found in milk fat, these are the saturated, these are the triglycerides, triacyl glycerides, the saturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids, the phospholipids, this is now the trend here in New Zealand. This is great bioactives from milk fat, as well as the milk fat globule. Next, please. So how do we extract bioactives from milk? There are many ways of extracting the milk proteins so that we can yield bioactives, and the two most popular methods are by ultrafiltration and nanofiltration. These two types of processes are advanced food technology process already. So when we say ultrafiltration, you imagine an ordinary filter. So it's the pores of the filter is very loose. So there's no need of applying high pressure to force the separation. But take note, the proteins in milk are very, very small. For casein, probably it will be in microns. And microns, if you remember, microns is 1/1000 of a meter. So that's very, very small. And the whey proteins are even smaller. It's in nanometers. So nanometer is even 100,000 of a micron. So it is very, very small. So therefore, if you are trying to separate this, because the different whey proteins comes in different sizes as well. So if your target is to get, so if you recall, you have alpha-lactalbumin, then you have the beta-lactoglobulin, the the lactoferrin, the BSA or the bovine serum albumin, as well as the immunoglobulins. Among these whey proteins, the biggest size are the immunoglobulins, and the smallest size are the alpha-lactalbumin and beta-lactoglobulin. So you need different sizes of filters to separate this. And so you need ultrafiltration to separate the different sizes of proteins. However, once, if you recall, I said, sometimes there is a need to even break up the protein to get the bioactive peptides. So when you break up the protein, that's it, the size gets even smaller. And so you need nanofiltration already. So it means it needs even a more tremendous pressure to do the separation. So, okay, next please. So this is an example of an ultrafiltration. So this is a pilot scale. In big factories in like here in New Zealand, Australia, and abroad in other countries, they have even much bigger than this. This one is a pilot scale only. So this is where the filter is, and this is where the pump is. So the pump will suck the milk and pass it through the filter by building up a pressure, and it would force the smaller size proteins to separate from the bigger size, and then the process continues to separate it into smaller protein, smaller size and bigger size. But take note, if you look at a skim milk, you could hardly see any particles there. That's how small the whey proteins are. Next, please. So in schematically, this is how it look like. So if we look at this side here, let's say this is I will just start with the whey proteins. So the whey proteins, as I've said, have different sizes, ranging from the smallest, the alpha-lactalbumin, to the biggest, the immunoglobulin. Let's say if the smaller circles here are the alpha-lactalbumin, and the bigger size here are the immunoglobulins. So if you, by using as corresponding pressure, corresponding filter, and by using tremendous pressure, you can force this alpha-lactalbumin to pass through the very small filter and retain the bigger size proteins, like the immunoglobulin. And in ultrafiltration terms, the liquid that is retained on the filter side is what is known as a retentate, and the liquid that passed through the filter is what is known as the permeate. Earlier I saw there permeate and retentate. So here you can see the size, how high is the pressure. I couldn't see the unit, but I think that is in kilopascal. So it's very high. Next, please. So here is a comparison of the various sizes, okay? So as I've said, when the size of the particle is already less than 1 micron, usually it is already expressed in terms of molecular weight. So the molecular weight of the smallest whey protein is alpha-lactalbumin is around 14,000 Dalton. you recall your chemistry. Then the next size is beta-lactoglobulin is 18,000 Dalton. The biggest size, which is the IgA, so IgG and IgA are both immunoglobulins, but they come in different sizes. So the biggest one is 385,000 Dalton, and the IgG is about 146,000 Dalton. Then the lactoferrin is around 80,000, and BSA is about 66,000. And the membrane size or the size of the filter usually is about, you don't select the size of the filter based on just a little higher on this, usually about 5 times bigger. About 5 times bigger the molecular weight. So that's why 14 and 18 is around 20,000, so 5 times bigger. The size of the filter you will use is about 100,000 Dalton. So for the 66,000 and 80,000, which is about around 100,000, so times 5, that would you need a 500,000 Dalton. And for the bigger one, accordingly. Next. So, as I've said, when you do, I think some of you have access to a skim milk. Sometimes it's called a non-fat milk. I don't know in the Philippines how do you. So if you have a whole milk, that's where when there is fat. But if you have a non-fat milk, there's very minimal fat. However, I mentioned that the size of the whey proteins present in even the casein. Casein is about several micron in size, and you could hardly see it in whole milk. So, in order for us to see whether your ultrafiltration is successful in separating, for example, whey proteins, like the immunoglobulin and the lactalbumin, whether they will separate, you need to have a way of measuring or seeing the different size, the different whey proteins of different sizes. And usually the equipment used to do that is an HPLC, or what is known as the high performance liquid chromatography. So this is where you will get a sample of the skim milk, or if you have already separated the casein from skim milk by precipitation. Remember I mentioned about acidifying it, and the casein will precipitate out. So what is left is whey. And in whey, that's where alpha-lactalbumin to as big as the immunoglobulins will be. So you want to see whether how much of the beta-lactoglobulin is present or how much of the immunoglobulin is present. So you get a sample of that and inject it into an HPLC system. And I will not deal so much, but there's a way of detecting these different sizes. It will pass through a detector, and then it will produce a chromatogram. Next, please. And a chromatogram coming from the HPLC this is how it will look like. So if you notice, it's actually just a graph. On the y-axis is the time, and on the x-axis is the time, and the y-axis is just a signal. So the chromatogram will show the various amounts of whey proteins present. And how do you determine which is which? Meaning which one is immunoglobulin, which one is lactoferrin, which one is lactoglobulin. So what you will do is you will get a standard. So for example, you need to have a standard for alpha-lactalbumin. You need to have a standard for beta-lactoglobulin, and so on until IgG and IgA. So that way, because the theory of the HPLC is, if you use a special column called the size exclusion column, when you inject your sample of weight into the HPLC, the theory is the smaller size, if you recall, the smaller size among the whey proteins is alpha-lactalbumin. Next size is the lactoglobulin. It will elute first, meaning it will flow first, the smaller size. And the biggest size will come out later. So after I have a run of this and I identified the various proteins, so in this case here, if you look at, there's a 6, there's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the 6 actually corresponds to IgA. You recall? IgA is 385,000 kilodalton. So it comes out later. So it will come out later, meaning the first that will run are the smaller ones. So here, the number 1, I've identified it to be the alpha-lactalbumin. And the next peak is the beta-lactoglobulin. Number 3 is the BSA, the bovine serum albumin. Number 4 is the lactoferrin. And number 5 is the IgG. And number 6 is the IgA. And if you notice, the chromatogram, they come in various sizes. So among these chromatograms here, and by the way, in the chromatogram, there will be other peaks. What it means that these other peaks is, if you need to have a standard to really know it. But I suspect this bigger size here are probably leftover casein. Because if you recall, I said you can precipitate out the casein in skim milk, but sometimes there are still small fractions of casein still left in the whey. So this might be just a fraction of the casein, and there are others here which I have not identified. But if you look at peaks, there are peaks that are bigger. So among the peaks here, it's the beta-lactoglobulin which is biggest. It means in the skim milk, in a whey protein concentrate, in this sample of mine, which is the whey protein concentrate, beta-lactoglobulin is the major whey protein present, followed by alpha-lactalbumin and some IgA and even the BSA and so on. So that's how you interpret a chromatogram from HPLC. Next, please. Okay. So, but here is a representation of beta-lactoglobulin. So this is how you can see the beta-lactoglobulin as a whole. The small, the sort of round things there represents the amino acids. So take note, if this is the whole thing is the lactoglobulin, if you pass this using enzyme hydrolysis or fermentation and so on, this will break up into smaller chain amino acids. And those are the peptides already. So not all peptides that will break up from a milk protein are bioactives. Not all. But some are. And you have to have a way of testing that. So there are a lot already of studies done on a particular bioactive that have already been identified to be so. So the same thing for alpha-lactalbumin, it will probably look like that as well, but a little smaller. For the immunoglobulin, it will probably look like that as well, but much, much bigger. Okay. Next, please. Okay. I've been mentioning this already, that to derive a bioactive peptides from milk proteins, you have to carry out enzyme hydrolysis, fermentation, and proteolysis to break up the peptides from, and you can do that on caseins, the various caseins, and you can derive various bioactives. You can also derive bioactive peptides from alpha-lactalbumin and beta-lactoglobulins. But as I've said earlier as well, there are already milk proteins that are already bioactives in itself, like the lactoferrin and the immunoglobulins. So lactoferrin and immunoglobulins comes in very high percentage in colostrum. That's why the colostrum milk is very, very is important for infants, that they can consume a lot of that, because that's where they will get their immunity. Next, please. Okay, I already mentioned that to break up the proteins into peptides, you have to use these processes: enzymic hydrolysis, fermentation, and proteolysis. The peptides will have size ranges between several kilodaltons or several thousand daltons to as much as hundreds of kilodaltons. Because if you recall, like for example, if you have beta-lactoglobulins, that is 18,000 daltons. So if you subject it to enzymic hydrolysis, it will break up that beta-lactoglobulin into smaller components in several kilodaltons. So those are the peptides already. So the peptides will be recovered using the process of nanofiltration. I mentioned that also earlier, that to separate the very different whey proteins, you use ultrafiltration. To separate the peptides, because they comes now in a very, very much smaller size, you have now to use nanofiltration. So an even more advanced filtration process. Next. Okay, so what are the bioactive? So the bioactive peptides from Carabao's milk can be used in several functional food and nutritional products, such as for growth and development, bone growth and bone density, mucosal immune support, gut health. When you say gut health, this is, if you recall, they promote about drinking of Yakult. These are because they will provide microorganisms in your gut or in your stomach or in your tummy, so that it helps in immunity and against pathogen protection, as well as brain and nervous and health development. So these various bioactives from Carabao can be obtained. We look at your situation there in the Philippines. A lot of our Carabao milk production are utilized as a beverage only, as fresh milk, or even sometimes flavored milk like chocolate. But in some provinces, they utilize this Carabao's milk into kisong puti, or what is known as in English as cottage cheese. So these are the soft type of cheese which you produce by acidifying the Carabao milk. So when they produce this cheese, this kisong puti, there will be a liquid portion of that, because when you make cheese, you have the curd, which is the solid portion of the cheese, and you have the liquid, which is the whey. And I think at the present, they are not utilizing whey, where a lot of bioactives is present. So that's one area where you can get bioactive peptides. Or no, you get still the whey, and then you still have to subject this to enzyme hydrolysis, fermentation, and so on to get bioactive peptides. And then this can be utilized. For example, here in New Zealand, we produce these different bioactives from dairy, and we sell this to infant formula companies like baby formula and sports nutrition, so for athletes. So that's where they utilize these various dairy bioactives. In the Philippines, we have not come into this stage yet. We are still into beverage production of Carabao's milk and Isong Puti. We have not even moved beyond that to produce bioactives. Next, please. So these are example of products with bioactive peptides. So the milk formula. So this is for infant. This one is Pediasure. So these are grow-on milk. So meaning from toddler to maybe about preschool size. And then the whey, protein whey, which is for sports and health nutrition. Next. Next, please. So I mentioned earlier that you can obtain bioactives from milk, from the protein side, but also from the milk fats, where the fats are found. And you obtain these fats when you do the separation of whole milk into cream. So but in the Philippines, we don't produce much cream. And it's quite, but I think probably the reason is because we don't have that big production yet of Carabao's milk. So cream in itself is already contains a lot of bioactives because that's where the milk fats are. And here is a schematic representation of what's a milk fat. So a milk fat is a fat globule. So you can look at the violet thing as the sphere, and that's the fat globule. The fat globule, the contents of that fat globule is enclosed with what is known as the milk fat globular membrane. So meaning this one is just cut so that it will show that inside the milk fat globule, if you cut that milk fat globular membrane, you have the triacylglycerides or the fatty acids. The membrane that covers the triacylglyceride actually is where the bioactives are found. So the membrane have a lot of phospholipids as well as the MFGM, the milk fat globular membrane, which are some proteins. So if you have a way of utilizing the milk fat after you produce the cream, here in New Zealand, after they produce the cream, they will turn it into butter. So when they make the butter, there is the liquid portion of the butter, because when you churn cream, it will start to solidify, and that when it starts to solidify, that's already the butter. But there is a liquid left over, and that is known as buttermilk. So the buttermilk contains a lot of bioactives, especially the phospholipids. But in the Philippines, they don't produce much cream as well as butter. In other countries like India, where they produce a lot of butter, their butter, they turn it into ghee. So a ghee is actually, because butter, you need refrigeration for butter to be preserved, to last longer. So after they have the butter, especially in India, they will turn it into ghee. So the ghee is actually, they extract the oil or the milk fat from the butter. So what they do is they will heat up the butter longer so that whatever moisture present in the butter, it will evaporate, and eventually it will contain very low moisture. And when the clarified butter will contain less moisture, that is already the ghee. And that's what they utilize for cooking a lot of their Indian dishes. So in the Philippines, there's the only source that you can get your bioactives are the whey coming from Kisong Puti production. But if you have a lot of Carabao production, then maybe you can produce. I saw actually an article when I was searching for Kisong Puti. There's a farm in Luzon where they utilize some of their milk production into ghee production as well. And I was surprised that that there is, but in very limited amount. So it could be done even in the Philippine conditions, but not in commercial size. Anyway, going back, so if you have a way of getting your milk phospholipids and the MFGM, then this can be used for mitigating the risk of Alzheimer's disease. That's why, so Alzheimer's disease, this is usually the sickness where the people usually tend to forget, and usually generally this comes with old age. So a lot of the old people need a lot of these milk phospholipids. So here in New Zealand, they're already producing high dairy powder high in milk phospholipids. So and say aside the milk phospholipids, it's also good for repairing cognitive ability. It helps in the immunological defenses. It can reduce incidence of cardiovascular disease. Remember, in the early days of milk, they discourage ingesting whole milk because it's fat. But it turns out that the milk fat is a good fat, and it helps in a lot of these diseases, including cardiovascular disease. And also, say it reduces cholesterol absorption. The milk fat, which in ordinary layman's term, you would think, oh, it's fat that has lots of cholesterol. No. And it helps also your total liver lipids. So next, next please. I think I'm already at the end of my talk. Okay. Let me finish these last few slides. So milk phospholipids and MFGM are obtained from buttermilk. Remember, I said when they get the cream, they make the butter, the solidified portion of the butter after churning. That's the process of making butter. The liquid part is the buttermilk. So that's where you can get a lot. And also in New Zealand, they produce what is known as a anhydrous milk fat. They also make this from cream. And that will also produce butter syrup, which is a rich source of milk phospholipids. Because phospholipids and MFGM are derived from milk fats, most of the process of extraction use volatile solvents like ethanol. So it can be derived using, so So the old process is they use volatile solvents like ethanol and other. But there's a drawback of using ethanol because it is flammable, and at the same time there are some leftover ethanol. Although ethanol in itself is not that critical because actually in a lot of alcoholic drinks like wine, that is ethanol. The alcohol there is actually ethanol, so it's not toxic. So in New Zealand and in other developed countries, they now derive phospholipids by using a supercritical fluid extraction. So this is still an advanced process as well, wherein they use CO2, carbon dioxide, in a special chamber. In the supercritical state of CO2, inside the tank of CO2, CO2 will exist as liquid. Then if you direct this CO2 into a chamber where milk powders is present, like whey proteins powder, at a particular temperature and pressure, it is what is known as a supercritical state. The CO2 will go into the chamber and behave like liquid, so it will flow like a liquid, but partly it's also a gas. So that's why it will be able to dissolve the phospholipids present in the whey proteins. So this is another advanced process. Anyway, that's how it's done. Next, please. Okay. In other countries, the developed countries, there is what is known as a ProCream. So this is another product which is, so if you recall, in a lot of developed countries, they produce a lot of cheese, especially in the US. They produce a lot of cheese. So the liquid portion of cheese, in cheese production, because the solidified portion of cheese making is what is known as cheese, the solid. The liquid is whey. So what they do is they will use ultrafiltration to concentrate all the whey proteins. And as a result, there is still some leftover fat from the ultrafiltration production. And this is the ProCream. And this ProCream is a rich source also of phospholipids. So not only buttermilk and butter serum, but also ProCream. So to utilize that, they will partly break up whatever protein still left over, because even though you have taken a lot of the whey proteins, there are still leftover proteins in ProCream. So it needs to be done using a proteolytic enzyme. So to break up the protein, so that you only end up with a concentrated fat from this. So then you use again the ultrafiltration to enrich or to concentrate the milk fat portion. And then you can derive the phospholipids rich product. That's it, I think. Thank you. Next. So at the moment, bioactive peptides and phospholipids from Carabao's milk have never been processed in the Philippines. Most of the products, as I mentioned earlier, are made locally, are just Carabao's milk only, and usually processed into cottage cheese or what is known as kisong puti, and the beverage, the fresh milk. So there's a huge commercial potential for Carabao's milk bioactive peptides to supply producers of infant and sports nutritional products, and even for overseas producers. But this is, of course, if we already attain tremendous production already of Carabao's milk. But until when I left the Philippines in 2008, I think there is very limited production of Carabao's milk even in the university where I work, because they have Carabao production, Carabao milk production, because that's where the Philippine Carabao Research Center is found, Philippine Carabao Center. But there is very limited. So we can only utilize this technique of extracting bioactives if there is already an industry that produce tremendous amounts of these whey and cheeses from Carabao's milk, and then we can extract bioactives. But who knows, in the distant future, we will attain already self-sufficiency of milk, and then we can probably produce a lot of these products, and hence bioactives from Carabao's milk might be a reality. Next, please. So here is one infant formula, Aptamil. This contains milk fat bioactives, especially this is high in phospholipids. So not only whey proteins, but phospholipids as well from the milk fat. So that's an example of. Next, please. I think I've reached the end of my talk. Yep. And with that, thank you very much, and I'm ready for your questions.
All right, thank you so much for that extensive explanation of extraction of bioactives from Carabao's milk. Now, I know a lot of you who are attending this webinar have a lot of questions to ask our wonderful speaker. So this is the time where you can do so. If you have any questions, please type in your questions and we will have Dr. Diamante answer them for you. You can place that in the chat option here on Zoom. While you're doing that, I want to invite everybody to like our Facebook page and like and follow our Facebook page. That's www.facebook.com/foodstepconsulting, as we will be posting our updates for upcoming webinars. We had previous ones. We had 2 previous ones before. It's called Fruit Drying. Your journey to fruit drying starts here. And the second one we had was vacuum frying of seafoods. And this is the third leg for our webinar. And if you want to follow more, and if you have interesting topics you have in mind, we might be doing another webinar for that. So just follow our social media. All right. So if you have questions, please do send that here. And we will also be placing the link for the form, so you can have your e-certificate for attending this webinar. Very, very wonderful talk from Dr. Diamante right here. So if you have questions, I do have a question right here from someone. All right. So first question: is it true for milk? Is it true that milk will activate certain hormones in the body? Like for example, like female?
It depends on the source of milk, because sometimes a lot of especially in countries where it's not regulated, mm-hmm. there are antibiotic that is applied to cows, and probably that's the one that causes it. But the milk components only will not cause that.
All right. Thank you so much. So to everyone who's here, we want to say hi and good afternoon, and thank you so much for attending this webinar. All throughout, Dr. Diamante talked about different topics for extraction of bioactives. So if you have any questions, please do post it right now in the chat box, and please do follow our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/foodstepconsulting for updates. And if you have further questions or inquiries about the service and the service offered from FoodStep Consulting, we would be happy to address that for you. You could just send us a message through our Facebook page. We'll be putting the link to the form shortly for the e-certificate, so make sure to stay right here. All right, actually the link is there. So here's another question for you, Dr. Diamante. This is from Madeline Arimado. Says, what is the calorie count for Carabao's milk?
I could not remember it fully, but it's very high compared with cow's milk and goat's milk. It's high because the calorie count is usually the higher the fat content, the higher the calorie count. So that's why it will be higher than cow's milk and even goat's milk.
All right. So would you say that it's it's healthier than cow's milk and goat's milk?
I would like to clarify that all milk are healthy, but it really depends because the reason why I emphasize on the Carabao's milk, because if you are going to go into bioactive production, then you have higher amount of protein. Remember, that's where the protein is where you derive the bioactive peptides, which is the bioactive, and you have high amount of fat, the milk fat, where you also derive the phospholipids, which is also bioactive. So if you go into bioactive production or extraction of bioactives from Carabao's milk, then you get more compared with cow's milk. But all of them are nutritious and more healthy as well. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much for answering that question. I hope that answered your question, Madeline Arimado. What other products can we take from Carabao's milk, since it's very familiar here in the Philippines that there is a production, especially here in Cebu, there's a production of Carabao's milk for consumption of the public, and there's also products like ice cream used. Carabao's milk is being used. What other products can we see in the future with this technology?
As I mentioned earlier, butter production, cream production. So you start with cream, so meaning you do centrifugation of whole milk and you produce cream, and you then produce also skim milk. Then the cream could be processed into butter, and you can further process the butter into ghee, like the one happening in India. And as I've said, I come across in the internet a farm, a processor in the Philippines that tried to make ghee from excess production of Carabao's milk. So it could be done. Only the drawback there is there enough production that you can go to other products? Because, for example, if the production is only enough for fresh milk production and pisong puti production and ice cream production, then you cannot process the other products actually until we have excess production.
That's true. A revolutionized way of cooking, like if we use Carabao butter, and we will see new recipes, especially Filipino recipes.
And the ghee is just like lard. So ghee is like lard from animal fat.
But and we can use that as oil, right?
Yeah, but it's more nutritious because it gets a lot of phospholipids, the bioactives.
All right, thank you so much for that. We have a question here from Brian Bornias saying, do plant-based milk also have bioactive compounds? Which is more appropriate in extracting them? Ultrafiltration or nanofiltration?
Even plant proteins have bioactives as well, yeah. But as I've said, I think I explained it earlier. Ultrafiltration is used for separating whey proteins, the smaller proteins. You use ultrafiltration. You will use nanofiltration once you break up the whey proteins into smaller size. Then you use nanofiltration. I'm not very familiar with plant proteins, so I could not really explain it fully. But if it behaves similar to whey proteins and then to peptides after enzyme hydrolysis and so on, then it could be applied as well.
All right. Thank you so much. We have a question from Madeline Arimado saying, can we get you, sir, as our guest speaker in the future for this topic again for our school requirement to conduct a webinar?
Where about is your, what university or school is that?
Please do send us a message, Madeline, on our Facebook page. Again, facebook.com/foodstep consulting, so that Dr. Diamante can talk with you about this and discuss further. For any inquiries, just go to our Facebook page. All right? Awesome, awesome. So for further questions, we still have time to answer all your questions about extraction of bioactives in Carabao's milk. So please do take this time to really get into the topic. So if you're interested in this field, it is best that we ask the expert himself. All right. So again, we also posted a link for the e-certificate on the chat box here in Zoom. So just click the link and fill in the details so you will have the certificate for attending this webinar. All right. So I'll give you guys a few minutes so that you can think about a question you want to ask. So don't be shy. Dr. Diamante is happy to answer all your queries regarding bioactives in Carabao's milk. I know it was a very extensive explanation and a very informative webinar that Dr. Diamante conducted. So if you have any clarification, please just let us know. Right? Okay. Awesome. It's already 5:10 p.m. and I want to thank everybody here. Oh, we have a question first from Arnold. He says, assuming we have the capacity of production, what are your thoughts of using bioactives or research in counteracting on the crisis?
Counteracting on?
The crisis.
Oh, yeah. So, if we can extract bioactives from Carabao's milk, like from the milk proteins into peptides, there are bioactive peptides that help in the immunity. So if you take in a lot of bioactives from Carabao's milk, that will boost your immunity and that will help you from sickness and diseases. So a lot of from other countries are actually taking in a lot of various immunity booster supplements. So one form is a bioactive from Carabao's milk. But there's still a lot of research to be done on that yet. A lot of the research done already are on cow's milk. There's a lot of literature out there. But for Carabao's milk, it's still very limited. Even from India, where a lot of Carabao's milk production is, they even have also limited data yet on bioactives from Carabao's milk. So much more
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, a breakthrough in health and science. That would be really great. Well,
when I was still back at Visayas State University, I do a lot of I was a thesis advisor for my students, but at the same time for high school students. So this could be one topic that we could probably do either at the high school level or even at the university level for undergrad thesis, where they will look at, for example, the whey coming from Quezon Puti production. You can look at the bioactives contents of that. And then once you have a way, or you can just probably just think of producing a product out of that cheese whey. And then you have just a way of measuring that it helped in a lot of the healthy side of of, of, of things. So I could not really, but that's where the bioactives are found, whey from Quezon Puti production.
All right, thank you so much for that. We have another question from Eduardo Malyare Nastor Jr. says, hello, sir. Based on what you presented, what are your future plans? Thank you.
Well, my future plan actually, well, hopefully COVID will already finish by next year or in the next year or so. Because as I've said, Philippine Carabao Center is there's one Philippine Carabao Center in Visayas State University in Leyte. I am planning actually of approaching them that maybe they can, and even me, I can probably apply for the visiting scientist from the UST. A long time ago, I was planning to do that, but then because after I finished one job, I was applying for it, but then another job came in, this one at Separex. So I was not able to go there. But yeah, maybe when I retire, maybe I go back to the Philippines and then hopefully I can spur the research on bioactives from Carabao's milk. Even, in Leyte, from the Philippine Carabao Center, if there is research funding from that. Yeah, that's my long-term plan.
That sounds amazing. Hopefully that will happen. We need a new breakthrough in food and health as well. We have Gilfredo Legada asking, does organic Carabao milk possess different bioactives compared to non-organic and other types?
No, I think they should have just the same. When you say organic, is meaning you are feeding your Carabao unfertilized, meaning you are not using chemicals, chemical fertilizer, chemical pesticides to grow your feed for the Carabao. That's just the organic. It doesn't matter as long as even if you are feeding your Carabao with chemical fertilizer, as long as it's properly done, they should still produce the same kind of milk. So there's no difference there.
All right, that doesn't affect it. Hopefully that answered your question. Another question from Eduardo Nastor says, do you have collaboration at BCC and VSU regarding your research?
No, because of this COVID, it's locked. Well, in my long-term plan is eventually maybe I can, when I'm about to retire, I can probably apply for the visiting scientist, and then maybe I can go back to Visayas State University and then propose to do research there on the Carabao's milk bioactives. Yeah, so that's my long-term plan. But for now, no. We're just stay put here in New Zealand because of the COVID situation.
Yeah, hopefully everything will settle down and we go back to a sense of normalcy. Another question, last few questions. We have from MC says, what are your general thoughts on the business opportunities available, especially for small business owners?
To be honest, actually, bioactive production involves high investment. Because if you recall, an ultrafiltration plant or even a nanofiltration plant cost already millions. The HPLC equipment, although if you have a way of if you can link to universities, like for example in Visayas State University, there are HPLC in the Department of Chemistry. But the ultrafiltration plant, there's none of that. So that involves investment. So maybe if there's probably a big-time producer of Carabao's milk and might decide to venture on the production of various products from Carabao's milk, from cheese to even as far as the bioactives. Yeah, but I would advise against this for small processor because it needs millions and millions of pesos to do this.
All right. Hopefully that answered your question, MC. And to everyone out there, it's already 17 minutes past 5 p.m. We will be answering the last three questions before we close this webinar. Another question from another statement from Eduardo Nestor says, hopefully, if you come back to the Philippines, you can ask the Department of Agriculture or DOST for that matter.
Yes, definitely.
All right, all right. Again, inviting everybody for those of you people who are typing in your last few questions. Again, we invite everyone to like our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/foodstep consulting. If you have inquiries, you can definitely message us there, and we are active and we will be attending to your queries. Andrew Diamante says, what are the practical implications for bioactives in the current state of the food industry here in the Philippines?
As I've said, as long as you can produce these bioactives from Carabao's milk in greater quantity, then this could be sold to infant formula manufacturers, meaning baby formula, sports nutrition products. So that's where it will come in. But until there is enough production of Carabao's milk and there is utilization of Carabao's milk in other products like butter making, ghee making, and so on, if we still just at the beverage stage of fresh milk and flavored milk and cottage cheese only, then there will not be enough production of bioactives yet. So the practical application is as long as you can produce it in greater quantity, there's a lot of application of this. Because, for example, the company that I work at, we produce these different bioactives. Milk powder are sold in hundreds dollars per kilo. Bioactives, milk, dairy bioactive products are sold in thousands and thousands per kilo. That's how expensive these products are. But of course, there's a lot also of investment to produce this. Yeah, so maybe when the Philippines probably reach the stage where we produce a lot of Carabao's milk already and produce a lot of other products from Carabao's milk, then maybe we can move into that stage then.
All right. There's a lot of potential for it. There's a follow-up question actually. Is it possible? Is there any other possible implications in seafood, perhaps?
For this one?
Yes.
Actually, yeah. That's one area probably that maybe I can talk later on. When I started working with Separex Nutritionals, I was doing work also on bioactives extraction from fish waste. So the fish waste we're talking about here are when you take out the guts of the fish, like yung mga intestines and the gills and the hearts and everything, there's a lot of bioactives present in these things. So one area is probably like, for example, in Mindanao, where they produce lots of canned tuna products. So I'm sure that when they clean their tuna, there's a lot of these guts that's left over. That's where bioactives extraction could be done on fish waste. And there's a lot of fish production in the Philippines, like the canned fishes. So they have leftover guts and gills and other fish waste, which with a proper process, we will be able to extract bioactives from that. Yep. So
It
that's
can be useful. We have another follow-up of the follow-up question. Byproduct manufacturing could possibly be a good business to get into, taking into account that these are waste products from factories. Would you agree?
yes, I think so. Actually, there is probably a high probability of being more successful if we do bioactive extraction from fish waste or seafood waste and other. For example, from the slaughterhouses where they cut up the. So there are also lots of bioactives from milk, from the meat proteins. So I think there's more a likelihood that it will probably work in the Philippines. But the milk bioactives from Carabao's milk is still, I think, still probably a long way.
Yeah. There's still a lot of area to explore in. All right. So reminding everybody that the link to the form for the e-certificate is found here in the chat box here below. So please do click on it. And for those who have any other questions, you can message our Facebook page. Please do follow and like us. Again, facebook.com/foodstepconsulting. I want to take this time to thank Dr. Diamante for taking this time to tell us all about the extraction of bioactives or Carabao's milk. We learned a lot from it, and hopefully in the future here in the Philippines, there would be a big industry for it because there's a lot of work to do for it as well. And we are really honored to have you guys here on a Friday. I think it's already evening because it's 5:24 p.m. Thank you for spending your Friday evening with us. And
okay. Before we go, that gives me actually an idea. Maybe that my next topic, probably by the end of September, is bioactive extraction from seafood waste or meat
fish
waste.
guts.
Yes, seafood and meat waste, because there's a lot of bioactives out there as well. And that is a more practical business probably to go in, venture in the Philippines.
Yeah, that's true. Because it's such a waste if we just throw them away. Make use of something that is like considered a waste. So thank you so much. If you're interested in that topic that we might be having this end of September, please do follow our Facebook page so that you can be updated. We will be making posts there. So please go ahead and do that. And we thank you for joining. We want to thank Dr. Diamante for a really, really amazing and extensive talk. And I want to thank you for being here on this webinar, on the third webinar for Foodstep Consulting. And we will venture in more topics soon here in the food industry. So if you're interested in joining us again, do follow us in our social media site so that you can stay updated. And on behalf of everybody at Foodstep Consulting, we graciously thank you for your presence and we hope to see you soon. And we hope that you have a great weekend. Thank you so much, everybody. Good evening.
Thank you.